A long time ago, in the land of Soga, it was a place filled with many kingdoms. Some lived peacefully in coexistence. Others fought each other and clashed. Until one day, drawing inspiration from the larger kingdom to the west, one king thought, one ring to rule them all. Okay, enough with the dramatics. I had to find a way to open this episode, with a bang to draw in the listener, and this is kind of what I landed on, okay? Is it my best opening? Probably not. But you know what? It'll do. This king was not Sauron from Lord of the Rings, obviously, but like many rulers throughout history, he desired to rule over his neighbors. The man in question is the Okali of Bukooli. In readings about the many chiefdoms of My Dear Kingdom, some writers wondered why Busoga never managed to unite itself and challenge its neighbors. After all, they spoke the same language, albeit practiced different customs or traditions. The principal Busoga historian Waikele Wogo wondered about this, and offered an explanation in his book The History of Busoga. In my conversation with Father Kayaga of the Ginger Culture Institute, he too briefly mused on this topic.
And according to me, the Creator intended that Busoga becomes united, and that should be the challenge for every Busoga to work for the unity of Busoga. By theoretically how I can put it is that he intended that if one wants to rebel and get cut off, he would drown into those waters, by example. Either the Choga in the north, River Nile in the west, in the south, Lake Victoria, or in the northeast, River Mpologoma.
Yeah.
So it becomes an entity intended by the Creator from my own perspective.
Now, imagine my surprise when I come across an interview with the Wakooli recorded by historian David Cohen in the book Enkana. And the Wakooli literally said, and I quote, "I want to prove that the Wakooli was Kabaka of Busoga." By the way, Wakooli is the title of the ruler of Bukooli, and Kabaka is the title for king of Buganda. Yes, that Wakooli who stabbed the Ngobi of Chigulu in the back by telling the Kabaka that it was him who put the feces in the vegetables, if you remember from 2 episodes ago. Yeah, it's been a while. So I thought, how bold, but dismissed it as yet another ruler trying to establish a past hegemony like many other kingdoms were trying to do, most especially Bunyoro and Buganda. As I've talked about in my Bunyoro series, Bunyoro and Buganda went back and forth trying to prove to the British that they were each the ultimate rulers of the land before they came. Until I read William Fitzsimmons' paper and discovered that actually, Bukooli was trying to rule over Busoga. Now, that's interesting. They were the only ones with such an ambition and the drive to attempt to fulfill it multiple times. It was there that I decided to make the AbaiseWakooli of Bukooli the subject of episode 4 of the Busoga series. Let's start with their founder. If you listen to the last episode, you'll know that Okali created Bukooli. Okali is said to be the brother of Kakaire of the AbaiseMana. What's interesting about this dynamic is how Okali is featured in the main tale of the AbaiseMana, but Kakaire isn't in the one of the AbaiseWakooli. What's up with that? If the story is to be believed that he shagged his sister and impregnated her, Jesus Christ, then yeah, I see why they would pretend that the whole thing didn't happen.
Yeah? You'd screw your own sister for a slice of cheese.
I don't even like cheese.
That makes it even worse, you sick bastard.
It then becomes a he said, she said thing, which would make a very excellent episode on the Jerry Springer Show. Or Maury, whichever you prefer. So, in this episode of Uganda Jerry Springer for historical characters, Kakaire calls his brother Okali a sister beep beep, if you catch my drift. Only in this case, the paternity of the child is not in question, because Chitimbo, their sister, was his wife, at least according to Zefania Kafuko. Zefania is a Muiseibari, or was, he passed away, whose family occupied a prominent role in the life of the Bukooli state in the past. So, he knew these things. So as Okali would have it, he and Kakaire were never brothers. Kakaire? Who the hell is that? Brother? What? He doesn't know that guy. But like his supposed kin Kakaire overthrew the Abaise Musubo clan, Okali also gained power by displacing another clan that he and his group came in contact with. The clan they took over from? is called the AbaiseWakooli. Now, the AbaiseWakooli were a powerful clan that maintained authority through pastoral culture, probably similar to the Bahuma of Bunyoro and Ankole, and by way of religious influence. Namanya was the name given to the leader of the clan, and he was also believed to have powers of clairvoyance, meaning that he was able to see the future. He was also a ventriloquist, like the comedian Jeff Dunham, being able to talk without opening his mouth, which can be very disconcerting to watch and definitely added to the sense of mystery and intrigue that surrounded him. But that name, Namanya, I've heard that name before, because that name is the name of the hill that my family owns, which got me thinking, was there a connection between my bloodline and the AbaiseWakooli? Oh my god, could I have powers? No. And believe me, I've tried. I was the ripe old age of 50 when I was hoping that one day I'd be able to fire off a chidori into the bathroom mirror. Dork! Only to realize that my cousin was watching me through the doorway the whole time. Yeah, that happened. Now, where did the AbaiseWakooli originate from? What's their origin story? In talking about Busoga history, there are a lot of similarities between the founders of these states. So rather than having to repeat myself every single episode, I'm going to create a checklist of things that I'll run through every single time. Okay? So on the checklist, the first thing would be son of Mukama, grandfather of northern Busoga states. Okali was said to be the son of Mukama, so that checks. Number 2, hunter with 2 dogs. Okali was said to be a hunter with 2 dogs. Check, check. Had many children. We can assume he did, but the sources I've read don't mention kids other than Kagoya, the child horde of incest, and Mwanda Mukwaya, his son who succeeded him. So, maybe not a check on this one. Number 4, found an empty land or barely empty land. Check, check. It was said that the AbaiseWakooli found an empty land. And lastly, descended from Luo migration. That one checks out as well. And indeed, according to the research of D.W. Cohen and B.A. Ogot, the AbaiseWakooli were formed from a Luo group called the Kagor or Wahori. This was part of a larger group called the Omolo. Research shows that this larger group split up and some remained behind while the rest headed into Kenya. Those that stayed traveled around until they also split up into 2 clans, the AbaiseWakooli and the AbaiseBanda. We know this because 1, the travel routes for both clans match up, both travel from Mount Elgon on the current Kenya-Uganda border, and both stopped at a place called Kayango. The second way we know this is that, well, the AbaiseBanda straight up say so. So there's that. But the AbaiseWakooli also have a different origin, one that reflects the dual nature of Busoga's history. In episode 1, we talked about Mukama and Chintu as being the forefathers from which all clans are descended from. When historian David Cohen interviewed Samweli Wakooli, the clan head of the AbaiseWakooli in 1966, he said, their forefather Okali left Abyssinia, Ethiopia due to overpopulation. He then reached a place called Masaba, which Cohen labels as Mount Elgon in his footnotes. It is here that Okali met Chintu and Walumbe, which fits very nicely into the Chintu story of traveling from Mount Elgon as we discussed in episode 1. They quickly became friends and proceeded together for a while, stopping at various places until they split off. Chintu and Walumbe stayed in Buganda, and Okali went to Bukooli. The story here connects Okali and the state of Bukooli's beginnings to that of Buganda, which makes sense since Bukooli arguably had the closest relationship to Buganda than any other Busoga state, and this relationship would prove very beneficial to Bukooli in their pursuit of their desired goal to be the ultimate rulers of Busoga. Speaking of which, in one story, according to Zefania Kafugo, it said that Namanya, the ruler of the AbaiseWakooli, who would eventually be overthrown, demanded a form of torturous worship. He had his subjects come to the reception hall to greet him, and that they were to do so while placing their hands on a collection of spikes that had been arranged in front of him. The people would then say, "Praise be to Namanya," while gritting their teeth through the pain. As a workaround, some figured out that they could place their hands between the spikes instead of on them. I guess it may have appeared to Namanya from where he was sitting that they were putting their hands on the spikes as opposed to between them, because otherwise he never would have let them get away with it. Now, historian D.W. Cohen points out that this story is very similar to the one about a certain Kabaka of Buganda. The Kabaka in question being Kagulu Tibuchwekere, who ruled from 1734 to 1736. Kabaka Kagulu employed a similar method to Namanya. Because I imagine after a while of being king and getting everything you could ever want, kneeling before you doesn't quite do it anymore. Like it's old news, been there, done that. You know what I'm saying? So Kagulu got to thinking, how could he put a spin on this kneeling thing? How could he innovate? Like Steve Jobs with the iPhone. That's when it hit him. How about we make some mats with spikes and place them in the throne room? And anyone who wanted to ask him for anything would be required to kneel on those mats and greet him with the words, "Praise be to the Kabaka." Now, for some reason, my mind went to the guy receiving the order to make these spike mats. Like, can you imagine hearing that? You're like, I'm sorry, you want me to what? You want me to put spikes on the mats? Yeah, I can totally do that. Not a problem. Yeah. This was apparently the last straw for the Baganda people. A king without followers is, well, just another man. And he had to flee the capital. John Yakatura tells us that his people hated him so much that they tossed his body into the Bukooli River Valley. Which I imagine one person grabbed the arms and the other person grabbed the legs and tossed his body into the river. Done. The similarity between these stories is too much not to be connected somehow, and the evidence also suggested to Cohen that Kagulu fled not only at the same time as Namanya, but for apparently the same reason. And so the story goes that Namanya, a cruel king, was overthrown by Okali to establish the state of Bukooli. There is another legend, however, that offers us a more amicable takeover, except in this case, it was Okali's son, Mwanda Mkwaya, who seized the symbols of authority. It's said that Namanya went to war. With whom? We don't know. Before he left, he gave his wife his beads of authority to look after. When Namanya came back, maybe years or months later, his wife had passed away. Before her death, she had apparently given the beads to another man to keep them. That man also passed away, along with almost everyone in the village. So no one knew where these beads were. Now, there was a cattle keeper called Mwanda, and one day, he found something under a tree in the bush. So whenever Namanya would call him, Mwanda would reply by saying Waitu, instead of Wanji, which was a response given to a superior. Namanya was taken aback by this rudeness. How dare he respond to me this way? Others would call him by his name Mwanda and he would respond Mukwaya, which would lead to much confusion. Mwanda seemed to be playing some sort of silly game with his fellow villagers. So one day, Namanya had just about had enough and demanded that the villagers find out why he keeps calling out Mukwaya. He also said that if he doesn't tell them, they should spear him to death with reeds. The villagers seized Mwanda, tied his hands behind his back, and asked him. He said, "There are many important things in the bush. I saw things in the forest." Ooh, cryptic. But okay. "Show us," they said. "Show us what it is that made you reply Mukwaya," which means the one who finds. Mwanda led them to the tree and showed them a pot that contained the beads. The same beads that Namanya had been looking for. Namanya was ecstatic. He declared, "Lift him up, carry him on your shoulders, beat the drums. I have seen it now, and now I declare that it was right for Mwanda to answer Mukwaya." Namanya addressed his subjects and also said Mwanda is now a prince. No longer will he herd cattle. And when I die, there is no one else to rule but Mukwaya. And that is how Mwanda became the first Wakooli, ruler of Bukooli. Some of you might be wondering, I thought you said it was Okali. Okay, listen, this is just one of those things again. In episode 2, it was Ibanda Ngobi, Lugwidi, or Niro that founded Chiguru. I don't know. It's kind of how these things go. Going by David Cohen's king list for Bukooli, Mwanda is listed as the first Wakooli, so I'm guessing that he was the son of Okali who would be a forefather. Now, I started thinking, what do the Abaise Namnya have to say about this? Because according to Sidimani Waiswa, the clan head of the Abaise Namnya in the 1960s, Okali, also named Mkwaya, came to their lands and was employed by Namnya as a herdsman. During this time, Namnya's wife lost her beads and offered a reward of the back of a cow to whomever found it. That would have been a lot of meat. That still is a lot of meat. Okali was apparently led to the beads by a crow that feared that the beads might be a snake. He then took them to Namnya, who rewarded him by making him his prime minister, or the word they used was katikiro. Waiswa continues that Okali was a good, hardworking man, a man worthy of trust until one day he switched up. Okali ran away and made alliances with doctors. By this, I think he means witch doctors. So, yeah. But suffice it to say, he became an enemy of Namnya and would eventually kill 3 Namnyas. Remember, Namnya was a title, over the course of their war. One was Namnya Wanguvu, second was Namnya Manguvu, and third was Namnya Chirisenye. I think that's how you say it. This story is similar to the one told before, but different in that it paints Okali in a negative light. To the AbaiseWakooli, their forefather was a hero who liberated them from a cruel king, and also a good Samaritan-like figure that found the beads that belonged to the king. To the Abaise Namnya, Okali or Mwanda was an ungrateful murderous herdsman that they probably should have never hired. Okay, Bukooli in the 19th century. Bukooli in the 19th century, like the states of Chigulu and Bugweri that we talked about before, was characterized by a lot of succession issues. This was because the power of the state was shared between the ruler and the royal family, and many princes felt that they could strike out on their own and lead. It is for this reason that historian Peter Nyenga calls states like Bukooli, Chigulu, Bugweri, Busiki, and Bulamoji princely states. Other Busoga chiefdoms would share power between the ruler and the commoners, and he called those commoner states, Luguka and Bugabula being 2 examples. They saw how others were affected by the rivalries within royal families and decided it was best to keep them in check and to allow them as little control as possible. It could also be the case that that was what was happening in the beginning, and things changed. I'd have to look into that. In any case, by the mid-19th century, Bukooli would split into 2 states. First one, named Bulia, which was ruled by the central line, and then the second piece, called Buchemanta, ruled by a prince called Kalende Buchemanta. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's go back to the early 1800s. I want to hash out the events that happened in this century. Around that time, Chisangirizi, the grandchild of Mwanda Mkwaya, was the 11th Wakooli of Bukooli. And just like in every succession story ever, a member of the royal family got jealous. Here, it was Mukuva, whom Fitzsimmons called the nephew of Chisangirizi. But when I looked at the royal genealogy of Bukooli that Cohen put together, it looks like Mukuva was either the brother or cousin of Chisangirizi. Because Mutumba is listed as the father of Chisangirizi, and some say Mutumba was also the father of Mukuva. If you're confused listening to this, I have a visual on the YouTube channel showing this, so check that out. Anyways, Mukuva went to the Kabaka of Buganda and asked for an army. It was either Kabaka Kamanya, who ruled from 1814 to 1832, or Kabaka Semakochiro, who ruled from 1797 to 1814. Again, this is because these events happened in the early 19th century, but we don't know exactly when they happened. So, in return for the army, Mukuva suggested that they would split the spoils. Far be it from Buganda to say no, because as I've talked about before, Buganda was all about flexing its muscle during this time. They were then the dominant power in the region, having surpassed Bunyoro. So, an invitation to exercise their dominance was accepted wholeheartedly. Buganda assembled their warriors and crossed the northern part of Lake Victoria, and together with Mukuva's people, they attacked. Chisangirizi managed to defend himself and successfully pushed back against them. But Buganda, being bigger and having more resources, was able to come back for a second attack, and this time, they didn't send the riffraff. Oh no, they sent some of their best warriors for this. Using modern terms, let's call them their special forces. So these were Buganda's special forces. That's just what I'm calling them. And they were led by a man called Chikoyo. By the time they were done, Chikoyo had been given the nickname Butegere, which meant to be patient. And not because he was a man of Christ-like patience, oh no, but because he liked to go medieval on their asses with a couple of pliers and a blowtorch. That's Ving Rhymes, Pulp Fiction. What I'm saying is that it was implied that he would take his time torturing Chisanganese men. He was a sadist. So, Mukuva got what he wanted and became the Bukooli. This win gave Mukuva a taste of conquest, and now he began to think just like Buganda. What if he could be king of Busoga? Mukuva began to extend Bukooli's borders. So dedicated was Mukuva to the machine of conquest that it was said that every person who immigrated to Bukooli would become part of his army. Bukooli attacked and subjugated clans like the AbaiseWakooli of the Giraffe Totem. This clan was known for digging trenches and hiding in treetops from where they could spot their enemies, which is fitting given that their clan totem is a giraffe. You know, because giraffes are tall enough to reach treetops. They also attacked the state of Banda, which was inhabited by the Abaise Banda, their travel companions, a century ago. But this is false, because I found out that actually the state of Banda that was attacked by Bukooli was not ruled by the Abaise Banda who they traveled with. The Banda state that they attacked was actually ruled by a clan called the Abaise Chidui. Not confusing at all. Another clan they subjugated were the AbaiseWakooli clan, who have a hill of ritual importance called Busoga, which is the exact same name as the current kingdom. And you know what? I personally climbed this hill when I went back to Uganda earlier this year, which was incredible, but very difficult to climb and tough to get down from. Here's a video of it. For those listening, you can check it out on my YouTube channel.
When the going gets tough, it is the tough who get going. It is the tough who get going. You can see Akopo and David is struggling to climb down.
That was me trying to get down from the hill. It had no safe paths to descend on, so I had to crawl awkwardly down the hill. But despite being challenging and really being very risky to climb, I don't regret going up that hill. Would I go back again? Probably not. But the views at the top, oh my God, it was incredible. It was, I mean, when you're on the top of anything and you can see for miles and miles and miles, for me, just feeling the wind and also imagining what those who came before me, see what I did there, what they could see while looking out, standing on these hills, you can understand why they picked these places as places where royalty would stay, places where the king would stay. Because on top of that hill, he could overlook his kingdom. He could see, you could feel powerful. There was a sense of freedom that one would feel. Yeah, I'm just saying things, but yeah, that's just what came on my mind when I was up that hill. But it was incredible. And if you do want to climb it, I can help you climb it. What do I mean by that? I can put you in touch with people who would, show you the way and how to get there. But it's definitely not a safe climb and not for everyone. But yeah, it was incredible. Anyways, back to the story. So continuing in their tradition of attacking neighboring kingdoms or neighboring states, Bukooli also attacked a vulnerable Busiki state. So Busiki is one of the many states in Busoga. So Busiki was at the time fending off an attack from another state called Kono. This move forced Busiki to fight on two fronts, but they ultimately managed to defend themselves. Now, reacting to Bukooli's increased aggression, some states began to take defensive measures. Chiefdoms like Butembe and Bukasa appealed directly to Buganda and hashed out some sort of deal. We do something for you, and you leave us the hell alone. Butembe offered their ferrying services due to their strategic position on the River Nile. They probably said something along the lines of, "We'll carry your soldiers across the river, and you can attack anyone you want, just not us." Which, to be honest, is quite understandable. I mean, when you're faced with an incredibly aggressive Buganda state that is constantly attacking and winning against your neighbors, you've got to figure out some kind of plan. You can call them sellouts, but if doing this is the only way to be safe, I can understand that. Another state called Bukasa agreed to be some sort of lodging stopover. The Buganda would come to spend the night, eat, and proceed to rob, kidnap, and murder their neighbors. You know, just standard stuff. And actually, when I spoke to historian David Cohen, he told me personally that an informant told him that they used to provide intel to the Buganda. Bukasa acted as their spies in Busoga, or something to that effect. Another state called Una initially responded by hiring fighters and captains from other Busoga states, forming some sort of Avengers team with them playing the role of Nick Fury. Except, unlike Nick Fury, Una actually paid their hired team by giving them land and gifts. Can you guys actually believe that Nick Fury didn't pay the Avengers? What's more interesting to me is that these heroes are Americans, and they're choosing to work for free. I'm like, do you know where you live? You live in America. I mean, how are you going to pay a rent if you're not getting paid for what you do? You spend your whole day, quote unquote, fighting crime and, you know, tackling, I don't know, espionage things across the events across the world, and you're not getting paid for it? It turned out that actually Tony Stark was the one footing that bill. Anyways, these fighters that Buna put together were supposed to defend themselves against the onslaught of Buganda/Bukooli raids, but that didn't work. Buganda's and Bukooli's military were probably too overwhelming for such a small state to handle on their own, and so they took a leaf out of Bukooli's playbook and bent the knee.
This war has already wiped one great house from the world. Don't let it happen again. Bend the knee.
And bend the knee they did. They bent it so much that they kissed the boots of the Kabaka. Literally. Actually, metaphorically. Because they eventually displaced Bukooli in the late 1800s from their century-old position as the favorites of Buganda. Buganda dropped Bukooli like Woody in the Toy Story movie in his nightmare after he got tired of playing with him, which put them in a very, very insecure position, because Bukooli had a lot to gain from their continued collaboration with Buganda. Fitzsimmons tells us that they were the only Soga state to have consistent access to guns. And if you've listened to my other episodes on Bunyoro history, you'll know that Buganda had a monopoly in the region on trade with the Arabs from the coast. Buganda wanted to maintain their power by being the ones to sell them to other groups in the area. Buganda specifically forbade the Arabs from selling to Bunyoro. So, using what I know about Bunyoro history, was it the case that a state like Bukooli had more access to guns and goods than a bigger country like Bunyoro for most of the 19th century? I'm guessing yes. Because it wasn't until the 1870s when the embargo was broken. Kabalega offered 5 pieces of ivory for 1 gun. The Arabs tripped over themselves to sell to the Bunyoro. So yeah, it's probably the case that Bukooli had even more access to guns than Bunyoro for a while. Now, speaking of ivory, Bukooli had traded hordes of it in exchange for Buganda's military assistance and goods. In his dissertation, The Economic History of Busoga, Peter Nyanga criticized Bukooli's short-sightedness with their economic worth. He wrote, and I quote, "Rather than exploiting this unique opportunity, rulers in Bukooli became involved in such useless ventures as giving away ivory to the rulers of Buganda. And yet, this was one vital item in short supply in Busoga." He later wrote, this is Peter Nanga writing later, that this ivory was sent to Buganda for political purposes, thus exhibiting a tendency where priority was given to political rather than economic considerations. Close quotes. Nyanga is right, because Buganda was also running low on ivory. The demand for it was taking its toll on their elephant population, something Bunyoro had in abundance. Except Bunyoro did what Bukooli should have done. They wielded their economic power like a samurai sword and struck down the embargo held by Buganda. In Bukooli's case, perhaps they could have gotten more for their ivory. But then again, In their eyes, the trade-off was fair, because what they wanted the most was to have the military capacity to dominate their neighbors. And actually, when we say what they wanted the most, it's important to specify that it was the leaders of Bukooli that wanted that. You know, perhaps the common man didn't want that, or didn't really care about that, but, you know, the leaders themselves, the Bukooli, they're the ones who cared very much about this idea of domination. Anyways, Buganda had the weapons, manpower, and prestige to provide them to be able to fuel this dream of theirs. And so in that case, the trade-off was fair. But I also imagine that fear played a huge part in their decision. Buganda was a giant compared to them and not to be messed with, because despite their alliance, we hear of one instance where Buganda attacked Bukooli and carried off with 2,000 of their women during Kabaka Sunna's time. This would have been between 1832 and 1856. Given their tenacity, I don't think the Okali would have wanted to risk pushing their luck too much with Buganda. I mean, each of the Busoga states have some sort of story how either they were attacked by Buganda or their kings went on a political mission and just didn't come back. It's like, oh, well, what happened to King so-and-so? Well, he pissed off the Kabaka and had his throat slashed. Huh. Well, that sucks. Did you hear that King so-and-so put poop in the Kabaka's vegetables? What? Why? I don't know, but he's dead now. True story, by the way. I tell it in episode 2 of the Busoga series. Given what I've told you, would you want to be the one giving news to that guy? That you are now going to withhold ivory in protest for a better deal? Yeah, I don't think so. And so they continued with the status quo. Bukooli was spared from Buganda raids and participated in them. They became the liaison between Busoga states and Buganda. Anyone who wanted to speak to the Kabaka had best speak to the Bukooli first. Using today's terms, they sound like a Buganda embassy in Busoga. According to Lubogo, it was Bukooli that started the idea of Busoga states depending on Buganda. Bukooli was responsible for all matters concerning Buganda in Busoga. They heard disputes and collected taxes on behalf of the Kabakaship. In fact, this gave the title of Wakoli an esteemed air higher than others in the country. They sang songs of praise for him. This was especially the case for Wakoli Kaune, who was large and in charge from 1855 to 1892. Let me sing one for you. Well, not sing. I'm going to read it for you, because, no. You are handsome, but cannot see yourself. You are brown, which means light-skinned, but invisible. Here, his followers are praising him for his good looks that he is apparently unaware of. Kind of like that song, that One Direction song. You know, the one, you don't know you're beautiful. Baby, you light up my world like nobody else. Na, 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 na. Yeah, that one. Another one goes, meh. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. That's not how that goes. I'm sorry. I'll be serious. I'm a little male goat. I'm a little male goat. Whatever I eat is my only share. I'm a male goat. I'm a male goat. Which they say will be killed. A warrior eats his share. A warrior eats his share. Okay, me reading this is like completely off. And why did I read it like a Shakespearean actor's actor? I don't even know why, but the spirit just led me. It's like something came over me and I just felt like this sounded better in a Shakespearean way, and I could imagine it being played on stage with somebody reading, I'm a little male goat and what I eat is my only share. I don't know, I'm just being random. But anyways, to quote the immortal Michael Scott from The Office,
sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
In any case, these songs show the dedication his warriors had for him, especially this goat song. The Wakoli's warriors were willing to die for him in battle, and they expressed that using this goat song. To the British missionary Robert Ashe, this kind of devotion appeared to be extreme. He noted that the Wakoli's men even went as far as building rundown houses for themselves so that it was obvious that the Wakoli's house was the best. I mean, talk about devotion. This was the kind of respect given to the one who called himself the King of Busoga. The title was made even more legitimate when the Kabaka of Buganda, Mutesa, introduced him as such to the British missionaries. But all good things must come to an end, because like I said, Bukooli began to lose favor with Buganda. from what I could find. Fitzsimmons tells us that this was because Buganda began to lean more on their own armies than Busoga ones that had served them before. Furthermore, Buna, another state, had taken their place. I don't know what it was that they were offering that was better than Bukooli, but clearly the Kabaka liked it more. And by 1885, they were out and Buna was in. Which was unfortunate because Wakooli Kaune, like its predecessors, had spent his political career vying for the backing of Buganda to serve his conquest needs. And despite securing the political support of Buganda, it was during his tenure that the country split into two when an ashamed prince by the name of Kalende broke off part of the country after a failed invasion. This would have been 1855 to 1865. Prince Kalende apparently led an army of Buganda and Bukooli warriors to once again attack Busiki, which was again in a state of conflict. Attempting to take advantage of their civil war, Kalende pounced on Busiki, and just like before, they failed. So Kalende, thinking back to his earlier predecessor, not the one who directly came before him, but the earlier one, early 19th century, he probably did not want to go back home with nothing. And so he thought, well, if I'm not taking home anything, then I guess I might as well take half the country. I'm guessing he really wanted to have something of his own, and probably, again, speculation, maybe it was promised to him that, hey, if you take Busiki, you can have it. And because he couldn't get that, he was like, I'm taking home something. Kaune was not pleased and made several attempts over the years to get it back. It was recorded that even as late as 1890, he was asking the future colonial governor of Uganda, F.J. Jackson, to assist him in retrieving the state. Unfortunately for Wakooli Kaune, the task was made even more difficult when the state further split into a total of 6 segments. A reality not so unfamiliar in the Interlacustrine region. When princes came of age, they wanted to have something for themselves. Usually they were given land, but there were so many of them and not enough to go around that sometimes they would pack up and leave to settle in another area. Or, as was so common, begin to plot a coup. Despite this, Kaune maintained his respect and power as Wakooli. One of the things I found interesting was how he was saluted, or how he saluted. And it was during one of these salutes that Kaune was accidentally shot in the thigh and later died. Okay, so this story is pretty interesting. So this missionary, FCJCFG, I swear to God, his initials change with every single author that I read his name from. Anyways, last name Smith was sent to Bukooli to spread the good word of the Lord. Smith wanted to see the man himself, but he wasn't there. When Kaune returned, Smith was summoned to go see him, but was reluctant because he was exhausted and he had just spent the whole day building houses and he kind of just wanted to go to bed. But the messenger insisted and Smith said, okay, fine, I'll go. Following him was an overeager Swahili porter who had in his hand a Snider rifle. When they met the Wakooli, he saluted Smith by unexpectedly firing into the ground, which, apart from scaring him, probably gave him tinnitus. The overeager porter thought that he should probably do the same, and he did. He fired the gun into the ground. Robert Ashe, the missionary writing the story, tells us that he was chastised for doing this, but he doesn't say who did it. I assume it was Smith. Anyways, they go into Wakooli's compound and Kaune turns and embraces Smith in what Ashe describes as Uganda fashion. I'm not sure what that is, but let's call it a hug. Now, for some reason, the overeager porter fires his gun again into the ground. Except this time, the bullet ricochets and hits the Wakooli in the thigh. Now, if you're listening, I want you to take a deep breath and breathe out. Because either this guy had the memory of a goldfish, or if I'm being really charitable, he did not understand what he had just been told not to do. Because what was about to happen was chaos. The porter obviously did not intend to hit the Wakooli, but he was terrified. He was so terrified that he dropped the gun and fled for his life. The poor guy didn't make it very far because the Wakooli's warriors swarmed him, seized him, pinned him down, and split his head with an axe. I think. I'm not sure what weapon they used. In any case, they decapitated him and then rolled his head to Smith like a bowling ball. Now, I don't know about you, but this is where I would pass out. And you can bet FCJCTC, whatever his name Smith was definitely shitting his pants. Musaja Watu, poor guy, wrote this to Robert Ashe. Open quotes, "My dear Ash, very rarely do I care to renew the memory of one of the most wonderful experiences a man can claim to have had. It is too wonderful for many to believe, and that is one cause of my reticence about it. Another cause is its horrible reality for me, and the vision of that man's head dashed to atoms." Close quotes. Smith was traumatized. But there was no time to think about that, because then remember how I said that the warriors had a sort of fanatical devotion to their lord? Here, it was on full display, and they were ready to lynch another person, and Smith was that person. Believing him to have ordered the attempted assassination, Smith was yanked around, pulled around to be taken to his death. The only reason he survived was because the Wakoli insisted that they don't attack him. But the Wakoli was losing control of the mob, and any chance someone got to corner Smith, they took it, determined to instill fear into him. They only just stopped shy of actually harming him. Probably afraid of the repercussions that would come from harming a white man, a la a retaliation from Frederick Lugard, who I'll explain how he comes into the story later. So Smith managed to hide in the Wakoli's home, and Kaune told the mob that he had fled. Smith escaped and later heard that Kaune had passed away. They couldn't get their hands on Smith, but they took their anger out on the Buganda convoy that Smith had traveled with. Every single one of them was killed. This, despite, as I've stressed, Bukooli's close relationship with Buganda. It's almost as if, in this case, their loyalty to their lord superseded whatever consequences could possibly come about from this act of aggression towards Buganda itself. Now, historian Piri Nyenga tells us that the reason for Wakoli protecting Smith was because he had entered a blood brotherhood agreement with Captain Frederick Lugard in 1888. So by extension, Wakoli believed that all white men were his brothers. Now, is this true? And I only ask this because it just sounds so incredibly unbelievable. Wakoli defended Smith even when his council were holding meetings insisting that they kill him. But there is also another version of this event. According to Professor Ogengo Tunu, Wakoli Kaune was actually assassinated by his own people. This happened due to a treaty he signed with Lugard. Again, Lugard comes up in the story. Otunu gives us the precise date of December 7th, 1890. In doing so, Wakoli had unknowingly signed off his state to Lugard. Otunu continues that the Wakoli were so upset that when they found out, they killed their own leader. So was he accidentally shot, or was it an assassination? If we are to believe F.C. Smith's recounting, who was actually there, it wasn't an assassination. So where does Otunu get the story? This had me scratching my head for a while. It occupied my thoughts for days and weeks, until one night I awoke. What if? Hear me out. What if it was both? Let me explain. Smith saw the Wakoli get shot accidentally, but he never saw him die. We know that the Wakoli was on death's door for the next few days, until Smith heard that he had died at sunset. I'm saying, what if he was killed by one of his own while recovering? The motivation for this being an opportunity to take power for themselves, but also disagreement with the Wakoli on how he handled the events that eventually put him down. I mean, the Wakoli repeatedly refused to let his warriors have their pound of flesh from someone who was connected to his injury. To allow such a person to live might have represented a great disrespect to the title and prestige of Wakoli. So maybe they did kill him for that. But as far as Smith knew, Kaune had died due to his wounds. There's also the case of the word assassin. The porter was called an assassin because it was the best explanation for the Wakoli and his people for what had just happened. MacDonald, an English soldier, also repeats this and describes him as an assassin as well. So maybe the use of the word assassin gave birth to this other story and a motivation was attached on later, that it was his people that did it. But I don't know, I'm just speculating as always. In any case, Otunu uses the event of Wakoli's treaty with Lugard as another example of African leaders being tricked into signing treaties that they didn't understand. Otunu quotes Mukherjee, who wrote about A.F. Thruston, a British official in charge of making treaties in the region. He says, open quotes, "I had a bundle of printed treaties which I was to make as many people sign as possible. This signing is an amiable farce, which is supposed to impose on foreign governments and to be equivalent of an occupation. The modus operandi is somewhat as follows. A ragged, untidy European lands at a native village. The people run away. He shouts after them to come back, holding out a shilling's worth of beads. Someone, braver than the rest, at last comes up. He's given a string of beads and is told that if the chief comes, he will get a great many more. Cupidity is in the end stronger than fear. The chief comes up and receives his present. The so-called interpreter pretends to explain the treaty. The chief does not understand a word of it, but he looks pleased. As he receives another present of beads, a mark is made on the printed treaty by the chiefs, and another by the interpreter. The vagrant, who professes to be the representative of a great empire, signs his name. Close quotes. Wow. Yeah. So if this was how the Wakoli was tricked into signing a treaty, no wonder his people were upset. Could it explain partly the resistance of Wakoli Mutanda, the successor of Kaune? Maybe. But if this is how they're making treaties in the region, that means people might have seen this, might have come across this, and thus were able to find out that they had been lied to. But I don't know. I'd be really curious to hear about where Professor Ogengotunu got this story from, because it sounds like a very interesting story. Yeah, I would like to learn a lot more about this. And if you happen to do know more about this, please message me, hit me up, let me know. But yeah, that was the end of Wakoli Kaune, who was then replaced by Wakoli Mutanda, who resisted the British until 1899, which, as you know by now, is when all kingdoms were brought under the British flag. This is the end of episode 4. Thank you all so much for listening. For those on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. If you want a list of sources that I've used, stick around till the end of the video, or if you want, you can check them out in the video description box where I've also listed them below. I encourage all of you to take a look at the sources if you want to learn more. There's so much that hasn't been said. There's so much more to learn about all these places and people that I talk about. So I definitely encourage every single person to check out those sources. And if you have any questions, if you have any more information you want to let me know about, I am more than willing to listen and hear you out. My name is David Ibanda, and this is the podcast / YouTube channel, Those Who Came Before Us. Peace.